Hello everybody, we can start gathering at our seats and we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. Everybody hear me without my leaning into the microphone? All right, good. I'm going to get a hunchback if I go like this. Not good posture. Hello and welcome to November DataViz DC. This is Data Journalism, and I'm very excited to have this today. We've got a very, very large turnout. I believe we had something like 350 RSVPs, so by far our largest event so far. Thank you for signing up. Thank you for coming. If you're looking for the Wi-Fi, it's Washington Post Guest, and the password is Wash Post. Most everybody who wanted it has already asked. And this is our growth so far. The other lines in gray are the other Data Community DC meetups. Some of them have been around for a couple of years. The one in green is the DataViz. We have been on a bit of a tear since we started, even though we haven't had an event in the past few months. So. Thank you very much for your interest, and I hope we can continue this kind of streak, although I suppose there's only so many people in DC, so we've got to stop eventually. And, just taking a look at that demographic, I asked one of our partner organizations to put together a map of everybody associated with our Twitter handle. And right now this is not very intelligible, but it is broken up by all the different types of groups that you might come across. So it says something about the reach that we have, all the different colors, and how it is that they're organized with each other. Eventually we'll take this and we'll turn it into some insights about our community. This was created by Morningside Analytics. And in general, associated with those Twitter groups and our Twitter handle, we are launching a new effort today to make you part of the voice of Data Community DC. So the idea here is that if you include #DataDC in your tweet, our DC2 bot will then retweet it via our handle. We are reserving this for people who are considered active data community members. And what active means is subjective for right now, and maybe in time that will become more robotic to go with that bot. But for instance, Tony is doing the video equipment here. He's certainly an active member. We've got Greg Toth has, from Internet of Things, has created the easy buttons that have been collecting some of your statistics in today. That's certainly an active member. Of course, if you came in and you volunteered, that's active membership. So really being involved at events is what we consider to be active membership. And another active member is somebody who is both sponsored today but has also provided some cool visualizations is Significs. And I'm going to start their video for you and allow Mark to take over, although I think Mark probably want one of these. Hello. Hello.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Mark Sloan. I'm with Significs. We are a 3-month-old interactive data visualization company. You'll see some examples of work that we've done up here on the screen. We've got the computers in the background, but we're new to Data Community DC, but hopefully we're becoming more and more active. And really, I just wanted folks to get to see what we can do, get feedback from folks, and we are actively recruiting. So if we have data scientists, data visualizers, developers, happy to talk to folks. So.
And in case it wasn't clear, this is their tool, and I'm hoping that we can make this available through an API at some point. And This data that he was showing here is all part of the data set about our members here with DVDC. So this is visualizing our members, and in time we'll get into the details of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was thank you. And again, the live event feedback was done by Greg Toth in partnership with Internet of Things. I'll probably end up doing the same thing for him in his next event, because you either are running the event or you're gathering the data, but you can't be doing both. It's, you can't be in two places at the same time. So thanks again, Greg.
Can I make a quick mention? If anybody likes this kind of stuff, hardware, software, devices, come out and join us at Internet of Things DC, iotdc.org. Thanks.
And of course, DataViz is part of Data Community DC. We are a nonprofit founded in 2012. We have Data Science DC, Data Business, well actually it's Data Innovation now. DataViz, of course, Statistical Programming DC, Data Maryland, Data Science Maryland, and we may have Data Munging soon. We'll see in talks about that one. You can reach us online through our Twitter handle, on Facebook, simple searches for all that, of course. And if you are interested in becoming a part of things, you can be a speaker, you can teach a class, you can help organize events. If you want to be a sponsor, we're building different web apps. We're looking for bloggers all the time. Would anybody like to blog about this event and have it be up there? We got one taker. All right. We're always looking for blog posts about what's going on in the community, and general cross-promotion, and of course partnership, which can mean a lot of different things. Who's going to talk to us about that. If you want to know more, just tweet our handle at Data Community DC, and we'll get back to you. And Tony, our photographer now, has been kind enough to actually videotape everything that's going on. And if the gods are kind to us, we're going to make this available on YouTube. So this is very exciting to have this available. Thank you, Tony. It's another example of active member of DC2. And in December, I want to hold the physics of Santa Claus. I had a lot of interest in, more and more serious events again. Doing visualizations that were more like what we've already been doing, and I figured it was the holiday season, and I always loved these things about, Santa has to travel faster than the speed of light, and the number of kids that he actually has to visit in one night, and just how heavy of a load he'd have to carry at any point in time, depending on how many trips he takes, and the thermal coefficient that he ends up with the reindeer and all this sort of stuff. So I figured we could visualize everything, and Visually is providing some of the data for us. So I'm excited about that. We'll be doing this on Sunday Hacks at 1776. So again, if you're interested in participating in that, just go ahead and tweet Data Community DC and we'll get back to you. And in general, it's this kind of activity that makes sponsorship interesting. So, we have over 4,500, and this event has pushed DVDC over 1,200, so I'm excited about that. And, we're always trying to help people with their products, like we did with Singlifics, like we're doing with General Assembly, and I'll make Paul's announcement in a minute, or with Morningside. And, we're always trying to teach people about the cutting edge of data science and data visualization, or whatever the other groups are a part of. And now here's General Assembly. We're excited to announce this new partnership with General Assembly. If you're not aware, General Assembly provides online classes and in-person courses. They're currently out of 1776, although I'm not sure if you have any other places besides 76 that you're also holding classes?
Just over there.
Just over at 1776, which is right across the street in case you don't know. And they will be providing us some free online content, so through our site or through the Meetup sites, you'll be able to get to that. Discount on their main classes. If you're interested in teaching, they have a data science course coming up, and you may have an opportunity to become part of that, or if you just do web development. And more importantly, they are providing 2 scholarships to Data Community DC, one in web development and one in user experience. If you want to know about where to apply for that, just tweet with the handles that are up there in red, DataDC, and at General Assembly _DC, GA_DC, and we'll send you all the information so you can apply. The board of Data Community will be deciding who it is that wins those scholarships. Again, each one is for $500, so $1,000 total. Very excited about this. And to help promote it, He's buying the first round of drinks at Data Drinks tonight, which will be right across the street at Postscript, so not far to go. I wanted to have drinks in here. I always like having them right in the spot, but there's rules.
No, you can bring drinks here.
Oh,
Yeah.
how about that? How about them apples? All right, well, it's across the street. And we also made another partnership recently with Moderator East. And so if you use the tag DC Data 13, you'll get 10% off. They are coming up in December. Tickets are a couple $100, so that's a decent percentage off. They'll be having a number of sessions. They're also having a hackathon, and we'll be attending there as well. And but thank you in general to our sponsors, Flat Out, Cloudera, Tridio, Singlifics, Washington Post. Thank you very much for this space. ParkMe is an app that you can use to find parking in the area. It's really simple, and it actually gives you decent information. You already got the thing from Singlifics. Paul, do you want to say a word or two about General Assembly at all?
Sure. Yeah. Should I go on the microphone?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. So I think Sean kind of described generally what the partnership's about, what General Assembly is all about. I think some of you might have taken some of our classes or workshops in person or online. Just a quick show of hands. How many people have heard of General Assembly before tonight? Okay, so quite a few people. That's really awesome. And yeah, so we're basically right across the street. We're in the process of building out a really beautiful space together with 1776. And we look forward to welcoming you there very soon. We have classes, workshops, and all sorts of events that have been running for about the last month or so. And there's a whole lot more that's coming, including the 2 courses that Sean mentioned. So one of them is in front-end web development, and that's basically for people that are trying to break into the field. Maybe it's something for your current job, maybe you have a side project that you want to build. Great opportunity to learn the basics there. And others for user experience design. Kind of similar deal if you're trying to break into the field, really trying to understand and speak the language. And it's a really incredible opportunity to learn from the best. And then later this spring, actually, there's going to be a data science course, which we're also very excited about. And hopefully all of you will be learning more about that soon. Last piece, if you guys want to see everything that's coming up, you could go to ga.co/Washington-DC, or just kind of navigate to Washington, DC on the website, and you can see everything coming up. And I'm just Paul at ga.co if you have any questions, if you want to teach, or just have any awesome recommendations for things to do in DC. Great, thanks a lot.
Do we have anybody from Cloudera or Tridia here? Okay. And does anybody else have an announcement? Dorothy will be walking around with microphone. Harlan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Dempsey, and as Sean was saying, I'm starting a Data Wranglers DC meetup. And so what that really is all about is, I kept hearing people saying, well, 80 to 90% of all data projects is just getting the data into a format that you can use. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. I do that. I mean, I know it's not sexy or glamorous, but it's definitely something a lot of us working with data do. And so I said, well, why don't I start a meetup where we're really hands-on with exactly how to do that kind of thing. So the first meetup is on December 4th. It was going to be at my company. I now have to find a new venue, but it's all good. Either way, we'll have food and drinks and maybe alcoholic beverages just to get y'all there. And also, I'll be talking about web scraping with Python. So I'll be showing you code and everything. You don't have to be a Python coder or anything. Don't worry about that. It is geeky, but you don't have to be all geeky like myself. But I will be showing you how to write Python to scrape web pages and then turn that into an actual data set that you can use. So you'll walk out with code in hand so that you can do that legally, albeit. So December 4th, please join Data Wranglers Meetup on Meetup. Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Schwabish. I'm one of the co-organizers of DVDC. If you're interested in learning more about data visualization, I'm teaching a one-day workshop on Thursday, 2 days from now. And if you're a member of DataViz DC or Data Community DC, we'll be knocking some cash off the top. So come see me afterwards, I'll hang out.
Hi, I'm Brad Neiman of Semantic Community. Two announcements. One is I participated in the America's Data Fest recently using migration data. I thought it was a very well organized event, and I hope we can have more events like that. Second, I've been asked to organize a data science class at George Mason University, which I'm tentatively calling Practical Data Science for Data Scientists. If you're interested, you can see me for more information on that.
Thank you. For where? For you, okay.
Hello, I'm Aaron, and I will tell you about yet another meetup. So it's this Thursday, which unfortunately conflicts, but there will be more in the future. The meetup is called Hack and Tell, like show and tell, not like evil hackers and security and stuff. So it's, if you do a cool side project and you want to share it, you come and you show it, and people talk about it, and it's fun. 5 minutes per presenter. It's awesome. Meetup, Hack and Tell, DC.
I'll take that.
Anybody else? Okay. And if you need any other information, there's myself. You have my handle, I believe. And Harlan is also going to be walking around with a microphone today. You can get hold of him. And as I said before, Data Drinks is right across the street. I try to make this as simple as possible. Except that it could have been here. Whatever. And before we get to data journalism, I did want to point out what this was. So for anybody who didn't get the download when they walked in, we are constantly interested in how many people are coming through, and we want to get data on this. We want to understand how many people are revisiting, how many people enjoy what we're doing, so that way we can make adjustments as necessary. So the idea was if you come all the time, you hit 1 month. If you really never come, or it's been 5 months, you hit 5 months. With that being said, I understand that people who've never been here before were hitting 1 month. So this is an example of where data collection can go in two different directions. So everybody who clicked the 1 month button, please raise your hand. The people who have never been here before, keep your hands raised. Everybody else lower them. So that's a good over 60% that people have never been here before. Okay, so 60% are doing that. And Greg, are we going to have this one go on the way out as to whether or not they like to commute?
No, on the way out it's going to be, did this meet your expectations?
Okay, on the way out is, did this meet your expectations? So if you hated this, hit no and bang it with your fist as hard as you can. And if yes, you lightly skip out of the way as you skip with the yes
It can
button.
be rated 1 to 5 too. How you like the event on a 1 to 5 scale? Just a number.
Of course, if everybody doesn't like it, I can just say that I mislabeled them, and I'll say that everybody did like it, so it'll work out in my favor either way. And without further ado, I would like to invite the panelists to come up to the stage now. We have moderating the panel is Frank Sesno right here, and we have Jeremy Bowers, Nikki Usher. Jeremy is with NPR, Nikki is with George Washington, Derek is with the New York Times, and Pat Downs is the graphic designer at the Washington Post. I'm very excited to have them up here, and I'll turn it over to you, Frank. And, thank you.
Two other mics up here, which will, here you go. So knowing that people are going to be voting on the way out changes the entire way that we were planning to do this panel. But before we begin, how about a little census? How many people, how many people in the room are data scientists? Okay, how many people in the room are journalists? How many people in the room are former journalists? What am I leaving out? How many people in the room are technologists? Okay. How many people in the room are angel investors? Go ahead, raise your hand. All right. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I am a director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at GW. I'm a recovering journalist. I hung out for many, many years at CNN and other global broadcasters before that, and certainly I have seen a lot of change, but nothing like the change that we're seeing now and the speed that we're seeing it. Jeff Bezos would have been here tonight, but he had some other data he had to attend to. But what I'd like to do is ask everybody here, just so we establish the terms that we're talking about, in a line or two, yeah, you can do it. It's okay. In a line or two, and we'll start at the end and come down. What do you mean, or what do you think you mean when you talk data journalism?
Darn, I was actually, Mike, yes, no? Good, there we go. I was gonna pass this one to Derek actually at the first, but it doesn't look like I'm gonna be able to get away with that. So, hi, I'm Jeremy Bowers. I work at NPR, and I guess you could call me a data journalist. I used to work here at the Post, and before that I was at the St. Petersburg Times for a few years. So I guess I think data journalism is journalism that is based off of some kind of structured or repeatable stuff, like data. So we can call it anything that's like maybe spreadsheet driven, or something where you have to collect information in order to make the conclusions that you're going to get. So I'm going to take the really broad view of data journalism, then leave it for the rest of the panelists to come up with much better explanations.
Hey, I'm Kat Downs. I'm the graphics director here at the Post. I would say that data journalism is taking sometimes hard to understand information, numbers particularly, and making them consumable, making them matter to people, filtering them to find patterns and make them meaningful. And that's primarily what we do in the graphics department here.
My name is Derek Willis. I work at the New York Times. I also used to work here at the Post. This is like an alumni reunion as well. And I would say data journalism is really about things that can be measured, writing stories about things that can be measured, and that's pretty broad and expansive, as Jeremy was saying, in the sense that you're talking about structured data, but also unstructured data. And I think what it means I think it has a bigger sort of, like the emphasis is more on the journalism than it is on the data, because compared to probably most of you, like the rest of us are pretty much pipers when it comes to like working with data. I mean, there is no big data for journalism yet, and it'll be a while, honestly. But I think what it is really working with information that you can measure in one way or another, and trying to tell a story based on that data or informed by that data.
I'm Nikki Escher. I'm with GW. I don't know if it's working. And I think I probably agree with a lot of what's been said, but I want to issue sort of a reminder, which is that all journalism is based on some form of data, right? When you go out and you do reporting, that's data too, right? So the real question is, what is different about journalism now that we have this thing that we're calling data journalism? So that's one of the things we have to ask ourselves, right? This is where I sit in a sort of academic position, right? What's different about this now that we have this new field that's emerged where we're saying there's something different? And there have always been journalists working with numbers, right? Even if you go back to early data visualizations, they have existed in newspapers for a very, very long time, right? So on some level, we're talking about a new phenomenon because you can measure numbers in an entirely new way, right? On another level, we're talking about something very, very old. So I think that's probably my...
Well, I want to pursue that, and I want to pursue that with the other panelists, because I think that's a really good point. I mean, certainly we made graphics in television a long time ago, and they were pie charts, or they were moving, bar graphs, or they were anything else. So when we talk about data journalism, what has changed? What is new? What's different?
So I think one is the ubiquity and availability of different kinds of data. That's certainly new. There's more stuff thrown at us all the time as journalists, and really the question is now whether or not we are data journalists, but like to what extent we are and what our abilities will be to handle the volume of information that we work with. But
do you consider yourself a data journalist?
Yeah.
You do?
Mostly because
Is that a different kind of journalist than a journalist?
No, I don't think so, although I guess you could put the distinction this way. I spend much more time interviewing data than I do interviewing people.
You get good sound bites from data?
Depending on the questions you ask. Yeah, the advantage obviously is you don't get all the great you might not get the great, really like the killer quote from data. However, it doesn't lie to you usually. If you have a great question at 3 in the morning, you can still ask it, right? And it's also like, it's very hard for data to walk away from when you're talking to it. Because I covered Congress for 5 years, and I know what that's like. And so But I think like
They lie to you all the time.
Yeah, I mean the difference. I think one of the you can sum up the difference or describe the difference in a lot of ways. But one of my favorite ways to describe it is that it actually happened here at the Post when I was here, when a reporter in style came and said, "I've been assigned again to cover the Pillsbury Bake Off. This is the annual cooking competition down in Orlando, wherever they hold it, right?" And so like these are one of these stories that news organizations like feel that they must cover. I'm not sure why, but kudos to the Pillsbury PR folks for making that a certainty. And she was looking for a different way to cover it. And what was made possible now, thanks to the internet, thanks to people's ability and willingness to share information, was that you had the entire list, sort of all the recipes of all the winning contest winners going back 4 or 5 decades at that point. And although we actually didn't end up writing the story for lots of weird reasons, but I was able to, write a little script, pull down all the recipes and all the ingredients of all the recipes, and my main takeaway was that no recipe containing peanut butter had ever won the Pillsbury Bake Off. And I thought, that's weird. It's America, right? Peanut butter. I mean, but no recipe containing peanut butter had ever won. And like, that story, like, or non-story, really, but like, even that avenue of reporting, I insist it's still a story.
This is the Washington Post, what?
Yeah,
front page.
At least. But I think like that avenue of reporting, like you wouldn't.
Yeah, but what's different about that is you could figure out that there was no peanut butter in a winning submission for the last however long.
You could. It would take you a long time to do, whereas I could do it in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
And that, like to me, like that's part of the massive, both the promise and the challenge of data journalism. That now you have all these things in front of you. You can do them. You have to be better and smarter about what you choose to do and how you choose.
All right, Kat, you're here defending the Washington Post. What's changed?
Thank you.
What's changed? So what's changed in all this?
What has changed with this information?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of things have changed. Clearly, there's so many more opportunities to collect information. For example, like new avenues of reporting have opened up to connect us with the people who read our stories.
You said new avenues of reporting about, what do you mean?
So for example, one of the projects that we did a month ago during the shutdown was a piece about how people were reacting to it around the country. And it was basically allowing people to drop a pin on their location and submit comments, and we would kind of mash up those comments and make a visualization out of it. It's not rocket science, but that's that's something that didn't exist before the internet, lots of high-speed access, people having a level of comfort with giving out information about themselves. All of those things are relatively new, and they allow us to connect with people in a way that, we couldn't individually, we could set up a poll, and we could, take a few days to do that, and we could have a regimented set of questions. Or, when that would be the way that we would have done it in the past. But now we have direct connections with people, and that extends to all the data that's available to us through social networks and all of that kind of stuff. So there's that avenue of reporting that's new, that's interesting, and that gives us an opportunity to figure out exactly what people want. And that extends, beyond them telling us their impressions and voting and giving us comments to how they read information on our pages, how they consume information on our site, how much they read, when, where, and how.
Do you think that's changing too?
Yes, certainly our access to the information about that consumption has changed, which gives us flexibility in the way that we tell stories to certain people at certain times. And so that's really exciting.
So Jeremy, tell us how data visualization both have changed and what it means to do data visualization at a place that used to be called National Public Radio.
Aha! Yeah, so working for a radio company is at least a little bit bizarre here because, like when you work for a print organization, if you did data visualization, you're doing basically the same thing on the internet that you did in print, just way better, right? So like in print, you would have a chart, it would be in like 3 colors or whatever, and sometimes the registration would be off, so like the lines wouldn't quite match up. But then when you do it on the internet, it looks amazing. And then people can like click on things, and you get like hover state, and like, oh my God, it's like the best thing ever, right? But for radio people, like we didn't have any of that. So like like my group that works at NPR, all of it is like magic to people who work on the radio because they're used to like having to repeat, and the third line is 27 long, and the fourth line, and so we don't have a similar like translation. It's a little more difficult for us to like talk to people about what we mean when we say data visualization. So the thing that I kind of took away from what Derek was saying earlier about how we have like a lot of information, there's stuff coming in from reporters. At NPR, the thing that we're finding is that our reporters are getting tons and tons of spreadsheets, and reporters fantastically are hoarders. And they like take and gather all this information. It used to be that they would gather like phone books of like old, government data that only got printed out onto like Byzantine stacks of paper, but now they're like gathering up spreadsheets and stuff, but it's not like they know what to do with them. They just sit at their desk and like write a story or like a 4-minute radio piece, which in case you don't know anything about radio, 4 minutes is like an eternity on the radio. So they write a 10-second radio piece or a 20-second radio piece based on a spreadsheet. And so the thing about the internet is that instead of having to tell a single anecdote from that big spreadsheet, which is what those reporters were trained to do, they were trained to take the spreadsheet, find one story, and talk about it for 20 seconds in like the most meaningful way possible. We can tell all of the 20-second stories, like every single one of them. And maybe there's a story that was near you, because we have a big national data set. NPR, we just worked on a project a while ago called Buried in Grain that was incredibly sad. It was about people who die in grain bins. Apparently this happens all the time in the Midwest, and this was like totally news to me in that I grew up in the American South and then went to college in California. But the thing that stinks about this is that people are like really young and they die in like really hideous ways, basically because there was no safety protection, because they didn't have a lanyard that costs like $5 at Home Depot. And if they'd been wearing the lanyard, they'd be fine. If they weren't wearing the lanyard, then they get asphyxiated and they die. And so the thing about this that was so great was that what we had was a giant national data set, but telling just like one or two of the stories wasn't as nearly as interesting as like allowing people to find stuff that happened near them and then look and see like, oh my God, I grew up in Olathe, Kansas, and like a 17-year-old died there last week. That's terrible, right? And so if we had done this with a radio piece, we would have had to maybe we'd have to be a lot more anecdotal about it. We wouldn't be able to tell you any any aggregate information, like how many total people died. And if we did do stuff like that, it would be really hard for us to tell you about your particular zip code or county or your like slice of America. But on the web, we can tell you about everything. And so that's sort of the thing I think that is very interesting about what we do at NPR when we're dealing with like NPR reporters who have no idea like what a chart is. Like we don't have quite, it's not exactly the same as it was at the Post, where everybody has at least a passing familiarity. Because even though really, really ancient, awesome reporters like your Walter Pincus or whatever read USA Today in the 80s, and so they saw a chart before. Like they know what a chart looks like.
Tell Walter you send your regards.
Right.
Nikki, I know you
not to write a story about me.
So I've been thinking about this in terms of words that I want to use when I talk about this. And these are some of the words that I've come up with to describe the kind of data that we have now. So I think one key word is that the data is movable, right? Or the data are. Can you say data is here? Is that okay? Are we going to be agree if we do that?
Can we poll? It's a touch.
It's a touch. Okay. Is are. Okay. I'm gonna use them interchangeably. Data are. Okay. Data are.
I'm going to say nice things on the way out.
Okay. So I think data are movable, right? And what I mean by that is, unlike in the past where you would get, a sheet of, congressional earnings, right? Now you can render those into a spreadsheet, and you can play with that, right? You can actually create new sorts of combinations. So data is movable, okay? Then you have this idea, right, of the near and the far. So you can zoom in on something really close to you, and then you get a far view of the entire country and the entire world, right, potentially. So you get a big story and a little story. The other thing I've been thinking about is that data, right, especially in the data community, data can be made public in really important ways, right? And so there's a publicity and a shareability about data. This goes to what Kat was saying, right? That data can be very shareable in a way that it was not before, and very public in a way that it was not before. And part of the job of journalists is to render data that was not previously public and translate it into a way that was public using all of these ideas.
I would add another word, because I think that's a really interesting way to think about data. That is, data are usable, and they are usable for the public. So in a project we were working on last year, we were considering what I'd like to call three-dimensional journalism. Three-dimensional journalism allows you, the user, to go into multiple dimensions depending on how interested you are. So imagine that the conversation, that the debate is over infrastructure in America. And imagine, because you've got a data and a map that you've got the data and the map that you've been able to put together, you can go and see the bridges in your community, or see what's structurally sound. We know that, you know, a huge number of bridges, for example, are structurally unsound. So where are the bad bridges? Then you can find out who's responsible for that bridge. Is that on a federal road? Is that a state road? Is that a locally maintained road? Then you can figure out who you can actually talk to, or email or text to say, why aren't you fixing my bridge? How dangerous is this bridge? So putting the data to use in this very interesting, interactive, three-dimensional way is something that's fundamentally different in journalism that did not exist in this way a very short time ago. So to me, putting that data to use is a way that's changed everything.
Yeah, that is a really, I mean, that is newer than I think most other aspects of this subject. The other changes that are, there's two, and they're very related changes. One is obviously that there's more, particularly governmental entities that are producing data, and they're getting better at it, slowly, very slowly in some cases. But that's also putting a lot of pressure, I think, in small amounts, but soon it'll be greater amounts, on journalists, because it used to be that you would have, you know, that the anecdote was the king. I mean, like, if you had a good anecdote, you could get a good story out of it. And that's still, like, it's still great and necessary a lot of times to have that powerful anecdote. But what the risk now is for journalists, I think, is that you have an increasingly, if you think of it as sort of like a river of data that's kind of going past us all the time, and more streams are being dumped into this river. The risk is that we go and we just grab a little snapshot here and there, which is what we used to do. And even like when I started my career, what we used to do for data journalism was you go and you request a snapshot of data from some government agency, and they give it to you, and you spend weeks or months writing up, you know, analyzing it, interviewing it, writing it up, and then the project lands like, you know, like a phone book on your doorstep with a big thud, and everyone's supposed to be impressed, and there are awards, and you're all happy. And, you know, we still do those projects, and they're still necessary in a lot of ways. But the risk now is, because of this increasing amount of data that's coming our way, that you do snapshots and you miss stuff. You're only getting a little slice of things rather than maybe a more coherent picture. And so now the other change, I think, is the shift for us as journalists is that in certain areas with certain types of data, we need to be consumers, like, of streaming data. We need to be consumers and analyzers of ubiquitous data. And probably the best example of that is that we need to, for example, when we're writing about crime, we need to have as close a view of the data as the cops do in order to understand the situation. And most major cities now have essentially, like, you know, it is not too far off from what you see on TV with, like, the grid and the pinpoints, and they get together in a huddle and decide based on the recent numbers where they're going to deploy their force, you know, their patrols. And if you're, as a journalist, if you're still covering crime by calling up a lot of cops, or which is still the way a lot of folks do it, and not really involved in sort of looking at data on a regular basis, then there's every risk that you not only just miss good stories, but that you miss the strategic shift that police officers, you know, that public bodies make. You miss them making a choice, but not necessarily broadcasting it to you. Oh, hey, we're going to put more folks here. You know,
which raises a really interesting question about how and whether journalists, new and veteran, are being trained to use this data, to tell stories around it, to be able to contextualize one data point from another, to be able to take a data set and, yes, find the narrative there, find the anecdote, but also figure out, you know, where the needle in the haystack are. So do you guys want to talk about that? I mean, do you have training sessions? Do they know what you said? your reporters are still trying to write 4-minute radio pieces that go on.
Yes, they are still trying to write 4-minute radio pieces. They do get paid for
Well,
that.
apparently millions of people listen to them too.
You know, what will you say? The radio is a compelling medium. I think that this is good, actually, is focusing on the reporter, because it's very easy for us, and also, just as a total aside, we are rank newbies compared to, what most of you do. Like our data analysis, people who are doing, averages and, other, central tendencies are, totally gods in our universe. So if you guys want to go somewhere where you can be revered, go get a job at a journalism organization. We need you really badly because we don't have a lot of the skills, and you need us because we will totally worship you. So
Are you hiring? Is that
everybody,
you're
all of
hiring?
us are. Just come talk to somebody. Now that aside is completely
Are you
done.
all hiring? Are you all hiring?
We got a job.
So that's the aside. But the broader point is that, because journalism is old, and because we have a lot of people who weren't part of the revolution, we have most of the people who are on the front lines of gathering things, haven't learned how to do data analysis, and B, they don't know what they might uncover in their beat. And so there's an awful lot of good things that you could get out of a beat if you're a beat reporter. If you're working on you're working on high school sports, or if you're writing stories about finance, there are fantastic reams of data, and there are people who are subject matter experts at that. But our reporters are not subject matter experts at that. And Derek actually has a good anecdote that he likes to tell about this when it comes to campaign finance, right? Which is that campaigns are much better than we are at targeting messages and handling money, and we are just really terrible at analyzing what they're up to. We're bad at analyzing how the campaign's message. We're bad at analyzing how they're moving money around, how they're organizing themselves, and that isn't just true of politics. It's also true of of economics. It's also true of how we handle sports. So we're really just at the tip of the iceberg, as it were. And it's not just because we're not good at analyzing data. It's because the data that exists is not necessarily the best data that we need in order to tell a good story. So the data that exists might be too easy. So to go back to Derek's stream of data analogy, even if you went in and grabbed the entire stream, it may be that stream of data is just all the easily gatherable stuff that has absolutely no useful real-world impact. E.g., I'm going to do an analysis of Twitter because Twitter has a streaming API. There is no guarantee that what you get out of your analysis matters at all. Maybe what you just got is a lagging indicator. Because you're trying to predict breaking news events, and when you do that, the breaking news event will happen, and then there will be a Twitter storm of people who talk about it. But all you did was find out that perhaps a large number of people talk about a breaking news event after it occurs on Twitter. So the point is that perhaps there's something to be said about creating data sets where data sets do not exist. And this is why open government is a big deal for a lot of journalism organizations, because there's so many stories that we're aching to tell, and we're unable to do so because the data sets that we need don't exist, or only exist fragmented or in pieces. I thought I saw one of the Northwestern kids. Alyssa, are you here? Yep. Hey, there we go. So the Medill students are working on a really interesting story about food security here in DC, and there is no single data set that will explain how food aid from the United States goes to where it's going. And that's sort of on purpose because it's easier to obscure horrible things if you only have patchy data sets that cover parts of the route or whatever. But it's also because if we had a single coherent data set, there wouldn't be a story to tell because people would go, oh, look at all this waste and inefficiency. So the mere fact that you have found a good story probably means that there is not a good data set, to help you tell it. And so in a lot of cases, we need to build stuff, and reporters are where we're going to get that from because they're the foot soldiers.
Kat, how are you working with the foot soldiers here at the Post?
The Post.
Cat,
go get him.
The data foot soldiers?
Reporter foot soldiers who are supposed to be using data as their weaponry.
We have a couple, well, it depends. We have a whole spectrum. We have the people who never touch data. It scares them a little bit, and they're really comfortable with what they know. We have people who are sort of the halfway point, who do some of their own analysis and they partner with our data experts. We have a few computer-assisted reporters who are just fantastic, who live and breathe information, and so they partner up. And then some of the time, that analysis is completely left to them. Back to your training question, I think that there is a huge lack of training for people who want to go into this, particularly in the journalism field. A lot of the people who have an interest in that are studying statistics and economics and other sciences, physics, computer science. we need those people in journalism. But, and I have a lot to say about the previous question.
You can do that too, it's all right.
Back to Derek's point, I think that like stream idea is
This is when
fascinating.
the moderator officially loses control of the meeting.
Sorry, I'm going to bounce right back. But the important, and this is about the reporters too, but what's most important from our standpoint as storytellers, whether you're a data journalist, data storyteller, whether you're a traditional reporter or whatever, is the story. And I think that that nugget, wherever you find it, whether you find it by sticking your hand in the stream and plucking it out, or whether you find it by, crafting measurements across every moment the water passes through the stream, it doesn't really matter. For us, it doesn't matter how you get it as much as that you get it. And I think that's why that far and near thing is so important, because I think in the beginnings of quote-unquote data journalism, a lot of times what people would do is just get data and throw it out. And I think that kind of gave not the best impression to readers about what we could do, because a lot of times people just need a story to be told to them. That's what they come to news organizations for. If they just wanted, numbers or, raw data, they would go to, census.gov or whatever, and they don't do that for a reason. So I think that partnership between data analysis and storytellers, whether those are two different people or whether there's one person in, the same body, that is the important nugget that transforms, information into stories, kind of.
Well, that segues us into the next thing that I wanted to ask about, and we'll talk about a couple of areas more in about 10 or 12 minutes. We'll open it up to questions from the floor and encourage this to become a conversation with and of the room. So what does it mean to be a data journalist? Does it mean that you're a technologist? Does it mean that you're an animator? Does it mean that you're a storyteller? Can you be all those things?
So yeah, this is, theoretically, yes, you can be all those things.
Are you?
But no. And frankly, this is like the unicorn question. Like, yes, I would love for there to be unicorns, but there aren't unicorns. I mean, and you see these job listings sometimes, you're like, we would love people to do all these things, and you wonder, who are they gonna, we have a lot of phrases for like the unicorn hire, the computer Jesus hire. I mean, these people don't exist.
That's what we're supposed to be doing,
right?
Backing them out.
Well, I think actually, I think really, honestly, like it's a very hard. I think looking for like the five, like the person who has all the skills in the belt that's going to be an extremely hard thing.
It's going to happen very seldom, if ever.
Right. So I think what you need to do is you need to sort of get people either who are in journalism, who show some sort of tendencies, to which, like, if you've got reporters, for example, who play fantasy, or members of fantasy baseball leagues, or soccer, or soccer leagues, like, you can probably reel those people in, like, there's a basis for an appeal there. If you have somebody who keeps, like, organizing, this is rare for reporters who have, like, very, very organized lives, but if, like, they're using a spreadsheet to organize their home stuff, well, you can get them to do it for work, too. Most of them, however, feel like when it comes to, like, sort of training and saying, like, classifying themselves, like, there's a deep, deep tradition in journalism and frankly, in journalism education of saying, you are here because you don't want to do math. Or it's okay, you can be here because you don't have to do math, which is suicide. I mean, it's the worst sort of thing that we could do as educators.
As GW, we offer something called a research methods course where we teach students actually regression, which is second level statistical analysis when they've already taken a first semester statistics. So are they taking their second statistics and analytics class? We are thinking of adding a second semester of data analysis to our. So I would just like to say that there are some schools that are doing this, and it's really important. One thing I haven't heard you guys say is you guys are sort of talking about the data as just sort of being there as streams, right? But one thing that we're going to be teaching our students, and one of the reasons to have 2 semesters based on data, is to actually question the very categories. And so one of the things we do, I'm sort of half trained as a sociologist, right? And if you look at the General Social Survey, which is the biggest collection of social science data that we get, it's done every year, and you ask questions about income brackets. And those income brackets, right, I don't remember what they are, but they're from like 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, right? You don't get, right, the means. You don't get the 15,000. You don't have a sense of who's between, you don't get the sense of who's 11,000, right? So the very categories that are being created by the choices that you make, right, are artificial constructions. When you get government data about spending, for example, the way that those things are categorized and spent, you can see this in some of the sort of the military contracts, right? The way those things, they don't make a lot of sense. I think you guys you did a really great graphic on, what was it? It was like intelligence spending. Like nobody, like what did those things mean, right? What was going into those baskets, right? So the really important thing that we're teaching our students is to be critical of what data right? What that data actually is composed of, the categories of data, and not to just assume that the data is going to tell you a story. So I think that's really important.
So it's not like, I mean, honestly, we've spent very little time talking about sort of like specific technologies, thankfully, because let's not have holy wars, right? But one of the reasons is that like you can learn technologies, you can learn tools, but if you don't have the critical approach to it, if you don't have the ability to ask intelligent questions of data, then it's,
But one of the interesting challenges too, and this is contextualizing the data that you have, which is a really big challenge I find with students, and in training people who are going to tell stories with it. So, fine, your assignment is to make an infographic on the national debt. Okay, so it's $17 trillion. And you can do all sorts of interesting things, you can pull all kinds of interesting data in. But how do you contextualize that so that your audience can figure out whether that's really big or small, whether that's really critical, a critical percentage of GDP and jeopardizing the economy? How do they make sense out of whether that's really going to jeopardize them and their grandchildren as they hear the politicians yap about all the time? So how do those data get married to the context and the stories? One other area I want to go into before we turn to the audience is in creating data-driven news organizations, in building your news organizations, how do you compose the teams? Are you hiring data scientists? Are you hiring designers? Are these teams? Is this jobbed out? How are you going about this enormous challenge? Kat, why don't you start us off?
Kat is a hiring manager.
And we'll figure out how to get to Jeff Bezos if she says anything that's a little...
He's doing all the hiring. So right now we basically most of the time work in teams. Like I said, especially if there's something that's really complicated. Everybody on the team has a basic knowledge of data journalism.
What's the team? What are the disciplines of the team?
Oh, sorry, my mic was on.
Within my team?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2 full-time computer-assisted reporters, 2 cartographers who are GIS, also analysts, 4 developers, designers, interactive designers, 3 illustrators, full-time reporter who's not a data reporter.
And the reporter who's not a data reporter is doing what? Taking the data?
Other kinds of reporting.
But is he, she doing the reporting based on the data that the team is?
Most of the time, no. For example, a recent project that we did was about the ShotSpotter technology in DC, and where the Emily Chow, who's here, worked on it, and Dan Keating and a couple other people on the team. Dan Keating was the data reporter, so he looked at all the reports, analyzed them, aggregated them, helped do some of the mapping. Then we had another reporter, Bonnie Berkowitz, who's on the team, figure out exactly how the technology works from just a standpoint of how does it listen, what does it hear, what can obstruct it, which is not data reporting. That's the traditional kind of reporting that just involves understanding subjects, going out, asking questions, looking at things. And so that's the kind of stuff she normally does. For example, the science of how, what happens to your leg when you wear high heels and stuff, that kind of reporting. And so...
It's right up there with the Pillsbury Bake Off.
Yes. Right. So in that case, we were pairing together, traditional kind of reporting with data reporting to make a story that is comprehensive across the board. And that's basically how we approach most of the stories that we do. Now for smaller things, it depends. Maybe somebody does, most of our data vises are based on numbers, so those can be done by a single person. It depends on the familiarity that the person has with the subjects, what the editing process is for that analysis and that display. But partnerships tend to work really well, and those partnerships tend to draw out the most interesting aspects of the data analysis.
But this is very much a team.
Yes.
Is that how this is set up at the Times and NPR?
There we go. The team that I work at is fairly new. I think we're only a year and a half old, and I've only been there a year and a few months. And so, our team is a little smaller, obviously, than the one at the Post, and it's a little web heavier. So we have 2 developers, 2 designers, a reporter, and an editor.
And as your reporter and editor, they're assigned to the data team?
Right, exactly. And so our reporter is actually kind of a coder, even in his spare time. His name is Matt Stiles. He used to work at the Texas Tribune. But he knows how to work a telephone. He can make phone calls to people and talk to them in a normal voice instead of breathing heavily into the other line like I would do. And he knows how to file a FOIA request. He knows what a fax machine looks like. He's exceedingly useful at interfacing with government.
You'd never get this out of your developers, is what you're saying?
And on the other hand, he knows what Python looks like. So, I can talk to him, entirely via Python code, which is perfect. And so, our team, then we have some designers, but our designers also have to do a little bit of heavy lifting on the web. So we do a lot of static applications, which are flat HTML and JavaScript. And so our designers end up carrying a lot of heavy water for that. Which means that our 2 developers, that's me and this guy named Chris Groskoff, we do basically very little for every project, which is exactly the way I like it. We don't have to make any phone calls, we don't really make any maps or charts, because maps are the devil, and it's too easy to lie with charts. So,
and you probably think you're overpaid.
Right, oh yeah, totally. So we write a handful of cron jobs and then we're done. Actually, I would like to talk a little bit about the composition of our team. So that tells you who our team is in their functional units, right? But it doesn't tell you where they came from. And unfortunately, all of us came from journalism organizations, which that's really sort of the struggle that news organizations have, right? Is that we can hire really from one of 2 places. We can hire interns who have worked for us who were at an educational institution, or we can hire people who previously worked at another journalism company. And that's really the only 2 places that we hire people, and this is a foundational problem for journalism. Because the kinds of people that we need to do data analysis aren't working for journalism organizations. Because, in case you haven't noticed, most journalism organizations, even mine included, are actively hostile to people who are really good at the internet or really good at data science. Right? You're not getting a ton of phone calls from the managing editor of my radio station. You're not going to get phone calls from the New York Times, right? It is hard for our organizations to hire the right kind of people because they don't know who those kind of people are. Now, there are smart people embedded through our organizations, and we are slowly winning. There are small teams of good things happening everywhere, and so. Our challenge is to go try to find people, who are outside of the journalism spectrum and try to get them to help us do the kind of analysis we need to do. Because the truth is, data science, the way that it is practiced in out in the real world, for maybe a consulting company or for a marketing company or whatever, could easily be an act of journalism if it was in, an effort to provide a better story for people, to uncover a truth. And so these acts of journalism that we do aren't magic or special because we happen to be journalists. It's literally that we're doing these very tiny compared to social science research or the work that you guys do on a daily basis is probably really boring. It's not even technically interesting. But the reason why it's good is because it's very focused, and we have these editors who will help us ferret out a very specific story, and then we'll tell it, and that story usually helps people accomplish something. It helps them be a part of a functioning democracy. It helps them understand the world around them a little bit better, or it helps them, hold people accountable who are in positions of power. And so what you guys
have is these skills to analyze data and to look at things very critically, and we're missing that. But what we have that you don't have is that we have the eyes and ears of a bunch of people who are looking to try to make sense of the world. And so it is a lot harder for you to get that in your day job than it is for us to get it in our day job. So that's sort of our pitch. Our pitch to the outside world is come with us and make a difference. We're gonna help you in the world.
And take a pay cut.
NPR has great stock options, but I am going to give Nina Totenberg your home address.
I mean, we can't, at the New York Times, we can't compete salary-wise with companies like Google. We can't, and Facebook, we can't. So we have to basically make a pitch on another level, and sometimes it's emotional, which is like good for students and people who have an attachment to the industry. But we've also found some success, not a lot, but some success in making the pitch on sort of the civic level.
So you've actually found it difficult to hire the people that you need to hire because the industry is just paying so much more, and you're not able to compete with them. Is that what you're, I mean,
that's not the main reason. I would say the main reason is that I think there are a lot of people out there who could be very good in a newsroom, in a newsroom setting, and in this kind of job. I think we've done a pretty spectacularly bad job of trying to find those people and to explain what we do. Because for most people, the popular image of newspapers is, is still sort of rooted in going and yelling, stop. The press is actually used to be in this room that we're in. They used to be right here where all of you are, and it is it's an amazing sort of thing, like being like a daily miracle. But we have to sort of update our.
What's the profile of the person you wish you knew more about or had applications from?
Probably somebody who probably somebody who isn't necessarily like a computer science major. Somebody who actually probably was a liberal arts major, but who kind of fell into this stuff or likes it on this, like did a project, maybe helped out some nonprofit in their community or fell into it doing, with friends or whatever, and is active sort of civically. Somebody who cares about things outside the realm of solving necessary but fairly arcane technical problems. Because our technical problems are, our biggest problems are not technical. Our biggest problems are, logistics, but they involve legal stuff, and they involve all sorts of crazy things that are very hard to sort of model. And I tell some of my friends who have engineering backgrounds or have CS degrees about what the process of working in a newsroom is like, and they usually stop eating. They drop their fork, and you're insane, that's crazy. Why would you ever set up a system that does it this way? And I would respond to them by saying, yeah, that's how it is, and you have to sort of learn how to deal with it from inside that. And so we have to do a much better job of explaining what we do and why, but also we have to do a better job of just telling them, yeah, you could work on something that improves the results of the search widget, this much for 7 months or a year. You can do that. Or you could come with us and you could write stories that change the world.
I like that.
And that's the pitch we have to make, and we have to actually back it up with doing those stories. but that's
and then changing the world.
But that's the way we're going to get it.
I want to go to the floor for questions, but we'll go out on this note as we do that, and it's a jump ball for everybody here. We've talked about what it means to be a data journalist, about what you're looking for in your newsrooms, about the transition and the training that may be involved in going from one to the other, but I'd be interested in some examples from each of you, quickly, about what you consider excellence in data journalism. I mean, we can talk about snowfall, right? But what are the kinds of things that you? That's what I hear that's what people want to brag about. But I'd love, what are your examples? What are your shining cities on the hill here for excellence in this sphere? Kat, you want to start?
I think there are so many examples. There's amazing things being done every day. Not to hate on snowfall, which is amazing, but there's so much else being done that it's almost.
Well, so give us.
It's amazing. For example, just within the last month.
That you've helped put together in your.
Just within the last month, we did that ShotSpotter project that I just talked about. We did a really interesting map showing the income and education levels for every zip code in the country, which was fascinating and really, really cool. We did another map about the top 1% and where they live. The Super Zips was the second one that I mentioned. Man, I mean, we just did a couple fantastic projects on the Virginia election, one that was about the demographics of the state and how the different suburban and urban and rural areas vote and why that impacts the way things swing. We did another piece on the margin of win and how that's varied in the last 3 elections and why getting out the vote and getting those big margins makes a huge difference, again, broken down by the type of area that it was. Just really interesting things. We did a really interesting data piece off the typhoon in the Philippines, looking at why that particular area is so hard hit so often, and just sort of like storms in that area, during the season. There's so many different stories we can tell, and it happens at all of the organizations that we're at on a daily basis, and it's really exciting to watch. And I think that gets to Derek's point about why we do what we do. Because it's fun, it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. Every day, you come to work, you have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea what information is going to end up on your desk, on your screen, but you have to tell a story with it, and you have to figure out what it means, and you have to figure it out fast.
Derek, how about you? A couple of examples.
Sure. This weekend, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel published a story that was remarkable. I mean, and this is the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. They did a nationwide analysis of the neonatal screenings that occur just after a baby is born in the hospital. And the story was about the disparities in those screenings. And so we're talking about, they looked at like 3 million screenings in hospitals all over the United States. And this is a story that is literally about the difference between babies who live and babies who die. In the most vulnerable, moment of their, of sort of human existence. And like, I read that story and I read it like on the train, and I read it twice because it was so good. And what made it so good, besides sort of like really just nailing the story, what made it so good was that it was a story based on not simply, as Jeremy was saying before, not simply saying, oh, here's a data set and I'm going to analyze it. It was, they put it all together. They went state by state. It was arduous, incredibly time-consuming work. But when you do that, you almost always end up with an incredible exclusive story. When you go in and you build the data yourself and you collect it. And so like to me, that's probably the best thing I've seen.
Jeremy, how about you?
Sure. I'll talk really quickly about an NPR project. Because we're a nationwide news organization, it's a lot harder for us to find something like really interesting to cover. Like the news nerds, like Holy Trinity is basically elections, crime, and schools, right? And so we only get to cover elections every 2 years. NPR doesn't really talk about crime a lot on the air unless we're talking about all of crime, and there's not like a whole lot of very good like nationwide data on that. And schools and education, it's really hard for us to cover. So, what we've been doing lately is partnering with our member stations, of which we have 400 and something, 800 and some odd total stations in 400 and something cities, which is fantastic. It's like having bureaus all over the United States. And so we just partnered with St. Louis Public Radio on a really interesting data set that they've been scraping together over years. Again, they had a crusty reporter who'd been like working on this weird campaign finance data set in which he'd been like scraping together the names of all these companies that have been giving to Missouri legislators, right? And just like piling up the totals. And so like he had a gigantic spreadsheet with like, 180,000 rows or something in it. It represented every gift that a lobbyist had given to a state legislator in Missouri since 2004, which is totally awesome. And so what we really wanted to do was print a t-shirt that said, my representative got, $28,000 last year from drug companies. What did yours get? And so that's one of the nice things that we can do at NPR is we can be a little bit irreverent because we don't have a whole lot of old print people, and because the radio folks are still really excited about the things that we do because they've never seen a chart before. And so we can do things that are a little more irreverent and a little more exciting. And so like that's an example of something where we can have a little bit of fun. But if I want to talk about something serious, I'd like to talk about the LA Times and like the sort of, they do an awful lot of this, but
Ben Welsh at the LA Times is a news nerd there who likes to talk about your clever robot friend, who is a robotic reporter that you have programmed to look for changes in data over time. And so they watch to check and see if crimes in particular areas all over LA have changed by a standard deviation, and if they have, it sends you a news alert that you had a lot of crime in your neighborhood last week. It is a effing fantastic use of our tools. And it's not even all that fantastic, right? The thing that's really great about it is that it's repeating and durable, and that they went through the trouble of mapping all of the areas in LA and building out objects for each one of those areas. So every zip code, every neighborhood, they drew a shape for it, and then they hold on to that, right? And then they allow you to select which one is yours. And then they also scrape all of this data from all over LA County and various municipalities there, which is, again, finding data sets that nobody else has. And so the result of that isn't, here's a giant table of all the crimes that happened in LA. It's a news alert when your neighborhood gets more crime than it had last month, which is fantastic.
Last word to Nikki and then questions to the floor.
I was just curious, who had actually in this room, besides the journalist, knows what snowfall is? Okay, so more people than I thought, but a lot of people who don't.
I don't really know what it is.
It is an immersive storytelling experience. The New York Times, you should check it out because the New York Times tried to do something really interesting about creating an immersive storytelling platform where there were some 3D graphics of mountains, and if you hovered around a name, it would pop up with a video. There were sort of things that you could point and click on, but there wasn't actually, in the end, a lot of data that was really used. There were some great maps, but there wasn't a lot of data-driven reporting. It was mostly sort of a really interesting way to tell a narrative.
So what do you see as good data?
But I don't think that's great because then it comes down to what is data, right? Data can be a map. Data can indeed be a video or a story, right? I think that's completely legitimate. I just think you have to think about what you want from data, right? So I think it's a sort of a misnomer to take data and say that there isn't data when you're just talking to people. It's just a different kind of data, okay? It's not, just because it doesn't have a number doesn't mean it's not data. It's just a different kind of data.
For me, the question becomes, when I was in my life and when I was bureau chief at CNN, we were thinking about, all right, what are we going to assign as a story? If we're going to seize the agenda here and set the agenda, what do we think is developing? How do we do that? And I think that one of the big questions about data is, where is it a tool and when does it become a crutch? It's like polling, because it's the other thing I worry about is the decisive and discernible use of data. And again, back on the contextualizing surrounding it, I think is really important in the storytelling, for that storytelling to be relevant. We need to go to the floor now because there are a lot of questions and I'm a few minutes late and getting to the floor. So here's the mic and we'll start right up front here. And
just say your name and where you're from and let's have questions, not...
And if you give questions and you're brief, and I can ask our panelists uncharacteristically to answer briefly, we'll get lots in.
I'm Brad Neiman with Semantic Community. I'm both a data scientist and a data journalist. And most of what you've talked about is in what's called the Data Journalism Handbook. Not very well known in this country because it's written primarily by Europeans. And the answer to two questions that you posed. One is what is really different, and what they say that is really different is the new tension in the newsroom from bringing together data scientists with journalists. Because the data scientists view journalists as too lightweight with data in their use of data. The journalists view the data scientists as too geeky for human consumption in a newspaper. And they hold up as the gold standard the Guardian newspaper. And the specific example that sets the gold standard is what they did for the Summer Olympics. They literally built a database of all the Olympic information, past and current, real time. And that database was usable by me as a data scientist to write stories, and was usable by the core of all the press that were there writing stories. And what they do with a team of people that don't naturally get along, but they have to get along because when they produce the stories, they have 4 or 5 tabs. And it starts with a tab for the raw data. Where did the raw data come from and how did the data scientists prepare it? And then they move up to the metadata about it, the visualization, and then background stories, And finally, the summary story. So most of their real serious data journalism is a 5-tab presentation. And that means that users all the way from data scientists to just the general public can pick the tab that most appeals to them, but then they can drill down or move up. And so that's considered to be the gold standard. It comes from a team of people that are forced to work together and overcome their inherent biases and learn to respect one another for what they can do.
Okay, let me just quickly ask Kat and Nikki if you want to jump in. Do you have that kind of tension on your teams? Is that an issue?
Could I have a?
Yeah, we need one mic here.
Within my team, no.
Okay.
I don't think at the Post
We don't have a lot of that kind of tension. I know it does exist. So it's sort of the Nate Silver thing a little bit. I mean,
Yes, I mean, I think that's overblown, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it
Can you
as,
grab the mic?
I don't see it as, like, we don't have these kind of like arguments or fights or, I mean, we have arguments because newsrooms always have arguments. Everybody in the newsroom argues, and if you don't, that's a certain sign you probably shouldn't be there. But I don't, no, not really. I think we do have, disagreements, but I don't think that, I think the issue of trust is, I mean, it's not false. I mean, like, it exists, but it's mostly because we've never had data scientists in the newsroom before, but we have them. You work with them a while, you find out they're people, it works out.
Nikki?
So I've actually spent a bunch of time at The Guardian, and I can speak to some of the differences between the European conception of data journalism and the American conception of data journalism. Within the European conception of data journalism, they actually have kind of a different understanding of what data journalism is. For them, data journalism is very much, it may not have anything to do with presentation at all. And it may have more to do with actually the rendering of data and making it usable. And so it's more deeply connected to data science. In the US, I think it has fewer of those connotations. In the US, it comes from much more of a lineage of computer-assisted reporting, which is a really terrible name to describe people working with computers. If you ask somebody in Europe what computer-assisted reporting is, they kind of look at you like you're crazy. But within the European tradition, some people argue, I've spoken to, that this has really been a revolution in using numbers in Europe and European reporting. But in terms of The Guardian and what they're doing in data scientists, the place I see data science happening the most is not actually within the traditional newsroom. Where you see The Guardian hiring data scientists and where you see the Times hiring data scientists is really at the level of monetization. So in ways that you can think about saving journalism, it's not, and maybe here, right, when Bezos starts to think about how you're going to monetize, is people who are starting to figure out how you can better personalize news, how you can better promote social sharing, how you can figure out the length of a story, how long that story stays up on the homepage. Because the kind of big data that newsrooms do have is the kind of aggregated click data, right? The kind of user data. We have so many, every single day, each newsroom is collecting every single click that has been clicked on if they want to, right? And that's a ton of data every single day. And so where the data scientist comes in, hopefully, right?
Hopefully
and so where the data scientist comes in, where I think The Guardian has something like, I've heard the numbers between, the last time I was there, I was only told there were 5, but then I've heard 20. I've heard 20 at the New York Times as well.
But there's people spread out.
Yeah. So if you want another way to get involved with journalism and another way to save journalism is actually to work in newsrooms and figure out ways to monetize some of this data.
So just a quick
I
comment. Data scientists call that lifting clicks, and they think it's a very poor use of data science.
All right, let's.
But we need the money.
I don't want to cut off the conversation, but there are a lot of hands, and so let's move around. Go ahead.
Hi, I do a lot of work with Code for DC and civic hacking, and I'm noticing a lot of interesting overlaps. We were just working with the ShotSpotter data last week, and I know about snowfall because I'm a huge fan of the New York Times, and I thought it was awesome. But one of the interesting things about snowfall was that right after it came out, a few developers pointed out that they were able to recreate it in a couple days. And instead of the New York Times saying, wow, that's awesome, let's do something cool together, they sued them. I mean, and it's an interesting kind of like clash of cultures, right? Because like where cool tech is going is open source, and I'm just wondering what you guys think about how that played out, what could have been done differently.
Derek, it's all yours.
First, I mean, it's definitely a fair question. I'd like to point out that we got a takedown or a cease and desist notice is different from the lawsuit. We didn't sue anybody. Nobody got sued. People, news organizations, tell people not to sort of recreate what they do every day as a matter of course. I think anybody who has legitimate intellectual property interest in our position would do the same thing. Now, what we couldn't, I mean, not we could, but like what the piece, I think what the sort of I think what really got the attention of folks at the Times that was that they did do an excellent job of sort of creating the experience of it. But like, for example, one of the maps, one of the 3D video things is of a mountain, has a lot of snow on the mountain. One of our guys in the graphics desk drew the snow, all of it, individually. It took him weeks to do. So, all due respect, they didn't do that. They didn't copy snowfall. They made a reasonable facsimile of sort of the experience of it. So, but, you know, I think it wasn't really like...
I mean like the broader, not specifically, but like a broader context of like cool tech is going in an open source direction.
Right, and you will, I mean, and I will say on our behalf, we have a lot of open source libraries. We have the creator of D3 is on our staff, and we open source libraries, not all the time, but I think we do pretty well, given our industry. And I think that, you know, it's kind of a two-way street as well. And so I think like we're always interested in people who are like, hey, I mean, we've hired people who could say, who've shown us stuff and be like, hey, I just did what you did. But we also like, you know, we're also, you know, it's kind of the difference between, hey, I think this is cool, and what do you think of what I've done with it, versus like, I just did what you did in, you know, in an hour. So yeah, we're jerks sometimes, and like we get offended by some things as well, but I think everybody does.
Hey, John, hang on a sec. I can't help myself because, you know, I get to do this sort of thing. I really want to follow up on that because you're making me think of something in specific, and to follow up with the New York Times. What is the difference? Well, so we've got a room full of journalists here, right? What is it called when another newspaper or another organization picks up on a story after somebody initially releases it? What's that called? It's called several things. I mean, it could be like if somebody like just either, yeah, it could be anything from syndication to following a story to extending a story. Okay.
There's ways to do that. Different ways to do that.
What's the relationship between that type of classical, I mean, people have been picking up on stories for millennia, right? And the snowfall example. Is there a difference? And, you know, is there IP on the old school? And now you mentioned IP on the new school. What's the difference between those two?
Well, I mean, I don't want to make a big distinction. I don't think there is a big distinction about like the IP thing, because they literally published a page that looked exactly like the New York Times. And whether that was on a print piece of paper or on the web, that's problematic.
Well, so if I publish something that has the exact same words as the New York Times.
No. It had the look, the feel, the logo, the actual words.
There is an absolute total parallel. The parallel, we call it plagiarism. If you lift the words and you don't attribute it, we call it plagiarism and we fire you.
Technology aside, like that's legally problematic.
So plagiarism is one thing. But people have been following up on stories for thousands of years.
And when you do that, and when you credit the news organization,
and actually, we're really bad at doing that. But but the distinction here is that they didn't pick it up; they literally reprinted it.
The parallel
Like
might
it
be
had
the
the
parallel might be
actual words of the state. If you
Derek.
advance or follow.
Frank, I think you see the parallel I'm getting at. I'm just curious where the line, where it switches from clearly you're half-brained and you're doing whatever you want and you're stealing our work to you're doing something that's yours.
So you advance the story.
So you what?
Like
It's two different
advance
stories, though.
Like a different story built on.
Back in the back, sorry.
Oh, hello, hi. Oh, sorry, I don't normally hold a microphone. I'm Adley, I'm a survey statistician at the U.S. Census Bureau. I'm also a, thank you. I'm also a donor and volunteer at NPR. I loved the grain story that was done. One of the things I've been mulling over that you guys were talking about earlier is, we do have there's so much data out there. I mean, I firsthand help collect some of that data now, but one of the things that was said earlier about, you have, as a journalist, you have to figure out what it means, and you have to figure out what it means fast. And each of you talked about like really great things that are currently being done. And I just, not to be a negative Nancy, but I just kind of want to hear about, if there's been a time where you found maybe the wrong story by all the data that's out there. Like if you ended up visualizing it in a way, looking back, it probably wasn't the best way to visualize it, or like ways that you would have maybe done it different.
It's going to be hard to come up with one of those on the spot. But yeah, I mean, definitely in terms of visualization, I think we make mistakes all the time because you want to sketch things, you want to try things, and sometimes if it's a quick thing, you go with one of the first two or three things you try, and then later you realize, hey, this set could have been visualized a different way. And then the next time around, I mean, the awesome thing about journalism is that every story is new, but it's also cyclical. So you get other chances, and you get to try things over and over again, and eventually, you can find a rhythm and say, hey, the last time we did that as a bubble chart, but this time we're going to do it with bars or boxes because we feel like it didn't really resonate well, it didn't really communicate, people didn't engage with it the way we wanted them to. So we come back around on things all the time, and that also has, that also it sometimes is in the story. We focused on, the X factor in this report, when really maybe people were more interested in Y factor, and then maybe we don't get any traction on it, and we come back after a week or two and say, hey, let's try this again with a different lead, with different text, with a different headline. Even the same data sometimes can shine if you just point things out differently. And usually that is a failure on the part of the storyteller to figure out what people want to know and tell it to them in a way that they can understand. And so we pay a lot of attention to what people say about the pieces that we create, how they interact with them, whether they share them, how deeply they go with them, and try to incorporate that into the next, whatever the next thing is that we're doing.
Okay, let's go. Just to move it around because we've got a little time.
Hi, my name is Linda Keene. I'm at the Communications Department of the
Stand up
International.
so we can.
My name is Linda Keene, and I'm in the Communications Department of the International Monetary Fund. And I want to ask a little bit about the consumers of data-centered journalism. How are those different from the old sort of print-oriented or maybe the radio-centric news consumers? And how do you measure the usage and the impact of your data-centered journalism? And how do you feed that back into the way you cover the news?
Great question.
Yeah, that's actually super awesome because the answer to the last one is poorly. So then we can go back to the first. So most of us are going to talk about web consumption, I think, although Derek has bylines in the New York Times occasionally, and Kat, I know your group has like some print folks, but like the group that I work at NPR is entirely digitally focused, and so what that means for us is that our audience is vastly different from the radio, right? So our radio audience is older, it is wider, it is wealthier than our web audience. And our web audience, we know an awful lot of things about now. It is increasingly coming to us via mobile devices, which means that our graphics, we have to build our stuff to work on a phone, which doesn't just mean that it has to be responsive, e.g., like fits inside the viewport of your phone. It means it has to be lightweight. Like we can't download a lot of big photos, and we can't grab a giant JSON file because your phone is like a really terrible internet device. Even though it's basically a supercomputer in your hand, it's really horrible at internet. It has like really high latency, and it does some terrible things when it comes to like rendering stuff on the page.
So we have to pay a lot of attention to like weird like page performance-y kind of stuff, which is something that like we should really not have to think about. And so eventually in the future, we won't have to think about that at all. We'll have like fabulous libraries that abstract all of that away. But at the moment, we're still kind of in like the guts of dealing with that. The other thing that we know a little bit about our audience is that because they're using mobile phones, it means that they are an ethnically and agey different group of people than the people who listen to the radio. And so this is kind of interesting for NPR, of course, because we're always like, trying to like appeal to different groups of listeners than just like the standard, old school radio audience. And so the way that we found that we can do that most effectively is by like appealing to people on the web, because that's a totally different pool of people than who listen to us on the radio. The overlap is actually really, really small, and it's kind of awesome. And so the problem is that like we don't have a whole lot of web-only reporters, right? Like our reporters are reporting stuff for radio, and then like our group is like basically trying to like insinuate ourselves in with them while they're working on stories or in their beats. And then we're like sort of building a parallel like companion piece to what they're up to on the radio. We very rarely build something that we like fully built for ourselves. And so the thing that kind of stinks about this is there's not a lot of good feedback, right? Like the feedback loop isn't totally closed, because it's not like we can go back to Radio Reporter and be like, hey, your thing did totally awesome on the web, everybody really loved it. And they'll be like, internet, what's that, And so like that's a little harder for us. Like there's like one really good example. This buried in grain story that we did about grain bin deaths. The reporter Howard Burkus is a great radio reporter, and he's like kind of web savvy, and he knew enough. Bless him. He knew enough to like give us a call, and he was like, so I've got this giant database thing, and like the internet is great for that, right? And we were like, yes. Yes, come talk to us every time that you get giant database things, And so, like there was good feedback in that. Like we could talk to Howard a little bit about like what kind of data to gather and like why it worked, right? It worked, and Howard actually helped us structure the web presentation a lot. Initially, we were going to build, so like this actually is part of that question about like what did you almost build that was terrible, right? Like we have a lot of feedback built into the process. What we almost built for that grain bin story was a big chart and like about like where people die, maybe a map that would like be like color coded. The problem is when we built that map and then looked at it, it looked like everybody was in Kansas and states where there were grain, and or states where there were a lot of people. And so we basically just built a population map of the United States, which is not doing anybody any good whatsoever, right? And so by working with our reporter, we like got some really good feedback that like the most important thing about this data set wasn't the aggregate numbers or even the trends, like none of that was important. What was interesting were these little nuggets, these summaries of how people died. And so what they would do is they would write the summary out, worker A discovered a shoe at the bottom of the grain bin and had not heard from worker B in several hours. Upon emptying the corn from the bin, worker B's body was found. And there are these really dark, and really technically written narratives, but those were like a compelling part of that story. We never would have known to feed our readers that, and of course our readers, that was also very compelling to them. Like us as big data dorks, we would have thought, build a chart, build a map. And what we really needed to do was build a structured way to get those stories into people's brains.
I'm going to stop you there because we have just a couple minutes and I want to hit a couple other questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jeff Quigley. My company is called Shuju, and we actually have a data platform that consolidates data for journalistic organizations and analysts. My question, I want to sort of piggyback off what was said earlier about data wrangling, spending most of people's time bringing data together rather than actually doing the fun, cool visualization part. My question is, among your teams, who does that kind of work? How do you do it? What are sort of is it scripting? Is it just split, sweat, and tears? What's kind of the way that that's done? And what are the skills that you would recommend for people to have in order to be better at pulling data together and being more of a consolidator?
Want to take that?
Determination, the most important skill I would say is persistence, because data wrangling is hard, or can be hard. So it's scripting, it's duct tape, it's bailing wire, it's data entry when we have to do it, it's OCR when we have to do it, it's whatever we have to do. There are software for this is getting better, inarguably, but a lot of it. But the thing, and yeah, you're right. We do have to spend a lot of time on what you would probably describe as like non-fun part. I mean, personally, I would describe it as fun, but that's kind of worked. But as non-fun as it may be, like that part of the process teaches you a lot about what the data is, and maybe more importantly, what the data isn't. And so, honestly, if it were ever refined to a point where you could just push button scraper for everything, I think that would actually be harmful in a lot of instances to us, because you become much more familiar, you ask better questions, you know about a data set's flaws when you are forced to sit with it for a long time and try to figure out where, where its little secrets and nooks and crannies are. And so, we use a lot of the same low-level tools, I think, that some of you folks are probably familiar with and know. But it's, the eyeballs on it is actually a really important part of that process.
Time for one last question from the back.
Hi, my name is William. I'm with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. I was interested, you all mentioned kind of your journalist aversion to graphs, and as you're doing more and more of these kind of stories, I was curious what your sense was about the audience's appetite and ability to digest these kind of stories.
I don't think all journalists are averse to graphs, and just speaking for my own students, we are building a generation of students who, while they might not be building interactive data, know how to work Adobe Illustrator, understand how to create good, informative presentations of their, you can look at our Planet Forward site, which is our site devoted to environmental sustainability. And you can see, I have a student who's interning for me right now. She is producing some of the stuff that, your Santa graph, right? That's kind of, we have students doing complicated layerings of visualizations. They're flat graphics, but they're doing that kind of stuff with things like, I don't know, corn surpluses. So I would say that the coming generation of journalists is in the way we're training them, and I can't speak for every school, the Northwestern student might, but more number centered and being much more visually aggressive.
And can I just say so the coolest assignment that I give, I have this multimedia reporting class I'm doing, which flows into the Planet Forward thing, which is something I started a few years ago, but I call the assignment Dazzle Me a Statistic. So they got to find some data or a number, they got to justify why that number is a story or can link to a story, and then they got to do something crazy with it. Funny, powerful, shocking, build a story around a simple or a thread of numbers. They're pretty intuitive at some of this stuff because remember, this is the video game generation. They've grown up with a lot of this animation and stuff. It's not intuitive with everybody, and the context is something that we still have to teach. The storytelling is still the most challenging part, but I think there's some real interest here. So let's just go ahead.
Say something quickly. Just Jeremy's cracking jokes about reporters not liking charts. People love charts, and people love charts more now than they ever have. At least in my life, as far as I know. People are like obsessed with charts. If you go on the internet, any blog that you're on.
USA Today's been doing this with their snapshots since they were invented.
People love these things, and that's like part of what makes what we do exciting, but it also makes it a little bit scary because it's like very crowded and like chaotic out there in Chartland. And so, it's really, people love charts, and reporters love charts. I think the trick for smart data journalists is to figure out what effective charting is and when to apply it. To get back to Jeremy's comment about mapping, when is mapping appropriate? People want to map everything, people want to put everything on a timeline. But if you're really thinking about communicating with information design and communicating with design, you want to understand what the best form for that is. And sometimes it's a chart, sometimes it's a map, sometimes it's a table, sometimes it's a searchable database, sometimes it's a text story that doesn't lay out every single number in the world, but only highlights the most important ones.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean here in just a minute, but let me just do one thing for everybody to, this is what we do in television. In the 10 seconds you have left, I'd love for each of you to kind of bark out where you think this is going. Does this change the culture of the newsroom? Does it change the culture of the news consumer? Is it getting, one line, each of you. Go ahead. Jeremy.
Derek? If I could do it in one line, it would be, as our readers get smarter, we have to get smarter with them. And so we have to provide charts, maps, etc., things that give them context around information they probably already know, but are missing some deeper view or something interesting of. And that's our job to provide context around.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's to bring order to the chaos. I mean, people are they're drowning in information. We gotta help them figure out what's going on.
I worry that we're simultaneously not progressing fast enough, and that also we becoming too enamored with new stuff and tools that we're then building things sort of for ourselves and our immediate competition and or colleagues.
To get people to stay on the site so we can make money off of it.
Amen.
With that, it's all yours.
And let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We are taking a little bit more information as you leave, so whether or not you like this event, and, wait, apparently it's not it. What?
Could I ask a question to the group?
Oh, Frank wants to ask you a question. You ready?
So one of the things that we're thinking of doing want to do at GW is we want to help. And, I know that's kind of counterintuitive from immediately to help, but at the university we can say that. And I don't know if John Dolan is here, John made it over, but John's over here. He works with us, and Nikki and I. And if you've got ideas about how we can help teach or connect, start an executive education program. I'm struck over and over by the need for training, and I already talked to somebody about this. I'd be delighted to have that conversation with any of you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. And again, as you leave, we're taking a little bit more information. And for those of you who don't know where the bar is across the street, Harlan, stand up. Harlan will be going there. Valerie will be going there. Tony is in the back. He's raising his hand. He'll be going there. If you have any trash, please throw it away. We are held responsible for this. We don't have anybody to clean up after us. And that's it. Thank you very much. Good night.